Hello friends, welcome here or welcome back. My name is Sarah and today's video is going to be my monthly reading wrap-up for September. Unfortunately, I don't have lots of titles to share with you this time, but I do have a few that I'm really excited to talk about with you today. So without further ado, grab yourself a drink of choice. I recommend the coziest option that is available to you, and let's settle in and talk about some books. The first book for September is Tequilla Kingdom by Alexandra Christo. This is not a new release by any means, but I've seen it circulating for a while now and it looked like it would be something that I would enjoy, so I decided to give it a go and I ended up really liking it. This is a dark romance fantasy, probably technically falls into the YA category, but it's essentially a retelling of The Little Mermaid. We follow Lyra, who is the daughter of a very evil sea queen, and Lyra is a siren, and the siren tradition dictates that every year that they're alive on their birthday, they take the human heart of somebody by using their siren powers. So the amount of human hearts that they have signifies how old they are. Now, Lyra is a little bit different because she has only ever taken the hearts of human princes. And as you can imagine, that has earned her quite the reputation in the human world, which is where our second lead, Ilian, comes in. Ilian is the Prince of Midas, which, yes, is a city of gold, but he's also the captain of a ship, a wanderer and a pirate who has managed to gain the loyalty of a ragtag crew. I'm not going to give loads of spoilers, but essentially Lyra is given a punishment by the Sea Queen, which ends up with her turned into a human and having her siren song and powers stripped away, and her mission is to take the heart of the human prince without her powers. And the story basically goes from there. The world building in this book is so wonderful, especially in the underwater kingdom, in the ocean. It paints such a vivid picture and it is such a refreshing and interesting take on the original story of The Little Mermaid. The hierarchy within the ocean is really interesting too, and the kingdoms in the human world are all very distinct and unique as well. They all have their own individual customs and like architecture, and just general feel of them is all very distinct. And we also have the classic trope of enemies to lovers done in a really slow burn way, which is what I want. The characters are all great. I love them all. They all have their own quirks and individual traits and things that you're rooting for and things that you don't like about them. They're quite well rounded, but you are rooting for both opposing sides in some way or another throughout the whole thing, which is nice, even when they're being really stubborn and really annoying. It also definitely had a great quest thread throughout the whole novel, as well as the romance and the world building. So yeah, it was a really fun read and a very unique twist on a very popular and well-known story, so I would recommend. The next book on my list is Playing to the Gallery by Grayson Perry. This is a short non-fiction book all about the contemporary art scene. It's about how people can understand or learn to understand art and the role that galleries play both to an artist and also to an audience. He talks through ideas such as what is art, what makes art worth something or meaningful, what can be art, and then who decides these things, who decides what makes art valuable. He basically answers a bunch of questions which probably have occurred to people that have visited art galleries who are maybe a bit too embarrassed to ask these questions, but they're things that we all think. The paper copy of this book is actually based on the Radio 4 Wreath lecture series, which Grayson Perry delivered. And it's worth mentioning that I listened to this in the audiobook format, which is just recordings of those lecture series, so it's really lovely to hear the original intonations and jokes and the way that it was originally delivered and broadcast, as well as getting the fun of the audience questions at the end of the lectures as well. The art world has a reputation of elitism and inaccessibility, and this is a really short and accessible guide which just really helps you gain a little bit more understanding of the industry and what goes into it and why. Plus, Grayson Perry has an absolutely fantastic sense of humour, and that always comes through in what he writes and speaks about. So this was a very enjoyable but also highly informative read, and if you're also interested in the art world, I would highly recommend it. The next book I have to talk about is Anne of Green Gables by Lucy Montgomery. This is a classic piece of children's literature set on Prince Edward Island, which is one of the islands around Canada, and we follow Anne Shirley, who is an orphaned girl who is adopted accidentally, originally, by Marilla and Matthew Cuthbert, who have sent for a boy from the mainland to help them on the farm. There's a mix-up, there's an error, and Anne is delivered to their doorstep. After a little bit of deliberation, they decide to keep Anne instead, and it's just about how she integrates herself into their community and all the trials and tribulations that she comes across as someone from a less fortunate background. It's full of heart, it's full of wholesome and funny little anecdotes the whole way through. The characters are very endearing and just so full of charm. I love Montgomery's writing. I recently read Emily of New Moon, and so I had to reread Anne of Green Gables because there's just something so beautiful about the way that she writes. The way that nature specifically and landscape is depicted is beautiful and heartfelt. And even though it is written for children, this is definitely something that I think anybody could enjoy, especially if you like gentle pastoral stories. This was a lovely addition to my September reading, and I'm so glad that I added it on. And the last video on my channel actually was inspired by this book and the kind of overall feeling and activities that are included in this, and yeah, that will be linked somewhere if you would like to check it out. Next up is To Those Who Have Lost, which is the debut novel from Quincy Clark. This is a classic quest-focused fantasy novel following 3 characters. However, for this review, I'm only really going to dwell on the first one to try and avoid as many spoilers as I can. So, the main protagonist and the first person that we meet is Moira. Moira possesses a very unique gift of being able to lead people to wherever their greatest heart's desire is. The only thing is, her gift does not extend to use on herself. When we first meet her in the book, she is on a different quest, and this leads her to meet the other 2 main characters in the book, Kieran and Silver. Of them, I will say no more. This trio of mysterious people make their way through the desert on this quest to find someone's greatest desire and also their way back home. In terms of content that I would say to be specifically aware of, there are quite a few spicy moments in this, so if that's not up your street, be warned. And there are also a couple of content warnings of sexual and physical assault, which some readers may appreciate a warning for. So let's start with the things that I liked. Firstly, the characters are fun, well realised, and pretty complex actually. They're all unique, and even though gaps exist, they're not actually that noticeable because of how action-packed the book is. And that brings me to how much I enjoyed the pacing of this book. It's really, really fast, there's lots going on. I love that in a classic quest. I actually want them to be doing things. And so a lot of that was really, really fun to read. And the premise of the book itself was actually just a really cool and original concept, and I really enjoyed this reimagining of the idea of burning desire, of something tangible and something that was real and that people could use as a guide. I thought that was just delightful to read. This is a really ambitious novel. The characters and the magic system exist within a very complex political system. But honestly, at times it was so complex that it actually didn't really seem to meld with the interpersonal relationships and the storyline that I personally was more invested in. I gotta say, kudos to Quincy for trying to integrate this character-focused narrative into such a intricate political world. But for me, that is where it did start to feel slightly convoluted, even immersion-breaking at times, because it was sometimes difficult to see how these systems were actually relevant to our characters in the moment, and in a way that meant that it didn't always really seem to actually serve the story that I was reading. I gotta say though, the actual world did sound very intriguing. In terms of the ending, I would have preferred a little bit more resolution. It did seem to end quite abruptly, but similarly I wasn't really hanging off the edge of my seat when it happened, so that might have just been me as a reader. Either way, I still really enjoyed the book. Overall, this was a really great read with a really ambitious and fun premise. It was very unique, it had a great pace to the story, and I also loved the wit that came through in the writing the whole way through. I think I would give it 3 stars overall. It was enjoyable, but it wasn't groundbreaking, and there were little bits that just didn't quite seem to mesh for me. However, I would definitely be intrigued to read more from this author in the future. And I think that if you are in the mood to read a classic fantasy quest story with a little bit something different, it's worth taking a chance on this book and checking it out. Hello again and welcome to the end of the video. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope that you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider giving a like and maybe even hitting the subscribe button down below. I would love to see you back here again. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. Take care, and I will see you in another one soon. Goodbye.